Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today it is time to once again look at the suggestions passed to the developers in 2019 for August, and we are now going to look at the ground forces section of it. After having a look at the aviation stuff, seeing that there is a conglomeration of not just planes and jets but also secondary armaments, it's time to delve into the ground forces portion, which is pretty much all just vehicles in themselves. So let's get started. The first vehicle we're having a look at is from Baconator, and it's talking about the T-31. Now, the T-31 is definitely an interesting gun platform. I'm pretty sure it was designed to knock over whatever the hell is in front of it, some form of artillery or vehicle which would be used for infantry support, probably annihilating pillboxes and bunkers and houses and so forth. And the idea is you take a pre-existing idea, so the M4A3 with the HVSS suspension when it comes to the chassis, take off the turret and add in this wonderful prototype turret. So what is in this prototype turret? Well, first of all, the central gun is a 105mm, so nothing different there. You know, we have the M4A3 105 in the game, but then to the sides strap two sets of barrels which are designed to fire 7.2-inch rockets, and the rocket rack, which is inside this cylindrical area, is 5 rockets per side, and that would carry in the revolver or the rotary rack around the place, and overall it would carry a total of 30 rockets and a little bit of 105 ammo. So the whole point of this upgrade was to add these little blisters on the side of this very, very small turret, so you could get some rocket assistance along with your 105mm demolition machine. It also had access to a 50 cal on the top and a coaxial 30mm, and a flamethrower. The flamethrower, of course, we haven't got a flamethrower yet in War Thunder. A lot of people have talked about how it would be interesting to have. I personally think it would be kind of interesting. I'm more worried about my frame rate personally than anything else, but yeah, the flamethrower would be found in the coaxial position, so you can see right here, so basically here. So looking forward, you would have well, sorry, not coaxial, but in the machine gunner's position next to the driver. So you'd have a flamethrower here, you would have the 105 in the center, and these big, large rocket revolver cannons on the sides. It sounds incredibly fun. Never got past the prototype stage though, unfortunately, but I still think it would be fun to see in the game as some kind of event vehicle. It also talks about a new design reticle system, which talks about how to fire the rockets and where to fire them at. Obviously, when it comes to the rockets, because of the position of them, not next to the 105 or, not on the same trajectory as the 105, they are a little bit skew-whiff and all over the place. Therefore, adding a new sighting system to be able to, guide them in would be a good idea. A lot of modern sights do this. If you've ever seen a Warrior's sight, it actually has a sight on part of it which guides in the ATGM, telling you specific distances and where the ATGM will be. So adding that type of sight to a machine like this, I think, would work pretty well. The next vehicle to have a look at is the T-72M1 from GDR, or East Germany, if you don't know what the GDR is. This was an export-built version of the T-72A, which would be put into the German tank tech tree. There's been a lot of talk of East German tanks making it into the German tech tree since we've had stuff like the M48 put in it, the M47, which of course are West German vehicles. So a lot of arguments for stuff like the T-72M have come up to be able to be put in them. So what is the T-72M? Well, it's kind of as simple as this. The T-72A was made in the 1980s, and it was designed to be heavily modified in its combat usage, pretty much the same as a lot of Soviet vehicles, and the T-72M1 was one of these modifications. It was designed to the same specifications as the T-72A, but it was supposed to be built in Warpact Allied Allied countries, including Poland, Czechoslovakia, and so forth. So what you would get is the same or similar design to the T-72A, but it would be built by different people. Therefore, the specifications would be slightly different, but mainly it should have been exactly the same. Also, there are limitations to this export version, mainly with the ammunition that it could fire. So this machine, of course, had the normal use of the engine of the T-72A, but the problem is it was limited to the 3BM15 APF SDS. It probably could fire higher grades of APF SDS, but because it was an export version for Warsaw Pact countries, therefore they weren't given, the best stuff. One thing you've got to remember, at the time of the Soviet Union kept, what they saw as their better vehicles and handed out the vehicles that they saw as less good, or designed much more for export and efficiency, which is why stuff like the T-80, especially the T-80U, seen as the MBT of the Soviet Union, was never used by any other Warsaw Pact country. So going from there, the T-72A was just a T-72 UM 1976 with composite armor on the turrets. We have the T-72A in game. It would be very similar to this in most regards, apart from, as we talked about, the general differences in building it. So there's actually a really nice picture or a really nice video here, which I've never seen before. It's only 13 seconds long, and it's actually showing the differences between the two autoloaders, because obviously the T-72, the autoloader was different to the T-64s and the T-80s. So if you want to see a really nice little addition to show you the difference between the two autoloaders of the two main Soviet MBT lines, the T-64 and the T-80, and then the T-72 and T-90, I highly recommend that. The T-72 used an electric-based system, where the T-64 would use a hydraulic system, and it's always been an interesting thought of mine, with the T-64, if your engine was knocked, or if your engine was off, would you be able to use the autoloader? And would you actually be able to manually use the autoloader? Basically, if you have a problem, would you have proper access to the carousel to be able to load the gun? Would you be able to fire it? And so on and so forth. And I'm sure by the time the T-8 came around, there was some form of auxiliary package, but who knows? The layout of the armor, when it had its upgrade of the 60mm applique, which was a later upgrade, the 1983 one, which once again is in-game as a modification. You had 60mm of applique, then 60mm RHA, 105mm Steph, and 50mm RHA. And therefore, when it comes to the T-72M, it would be incredibly similar to the A that we have in-game, maybe slightly worse if you wanted to give it its historic export model shenanigans. The next vehicle is Soviet, and oh, by the way, who is this by? Kev2Go. So thank you, Kev2Go, for writing this article. The next one is from Wolfpack, and it talks about, of course, the T-90, the late 1980s Soviet MBT, which is much more known as a mid-1990s Soviet MBT with the T-90A upgrade. The T-90 itself was spawned from two separate projects, the Object 187 and the Object 188. The Object 188 was based on the T-72B chassis, and it was designed more to incorporate a lot of the ideas that you found from the T-80 into a T-72 design. So the way I explain the T-90 series to people is, imagine you have your MBT, right? Your MBT at the time is the T-80. Generally the T-80U or some form of version on top of that. Then what you want to do is you want to make it more efficient, you want to make it cheaper to build, but also you want to keep all of the advantages that the T-80U gives you. So what you do is you take your technically cheaper, more efficient model, the T-72, you build from that, and you add in all of the features that made the T-80 great. So you add in the fire control system, you add in a nice APS system, you also add in the nice rounds that it gets, and you add in all of these factors on top of stuff like Contact 5 to create this conglomeration between the T-72 series of vehicles and the T-80 series of vehicles, and that ends you with the T-90. Now, it's definitely more T-72 than T-80 because it was based off a T-72, but at the end of the day, that was the idea. They were marrying the two ideas together to make this new fangled MBT. So what they did is they added in the T-80U's FCS system, as we talked about. Then they also added in the T-72 style autoloader, and after the modifications were made, the Object 188 started rolling out with the 9M119 reflex, which is of course the ATGM, and the T90, or the Object 188 as it was known at the time, was able to go around 60 kilometers an hour, which was incredibly fast. They also added a new engine package and a high turret traverse rate thanks to the 2E422 Jashim of 40 degrees per second, which is incredibly useful. They also added the Stora 1, the soft kill active protection system. If we ever do get these protection systems in game, I will definitely talk about the Stora, because it is, well, it's just very interesting how it all works. So after all of this, the Object 188 was shelved in the 80s, and this was basically because of the fact that it needed either more time or it needed more money. And at the time of the late 80s, the Soviet Union was falling apart, and one thing they definitely couldn't do was shell out a bunch of money for a new MBT. So it was shelved, and then when Yeltsin came in 1992, so around about 6 years after the project started, he found interest in the 187 and the 188, and he chose to push forward with these projects and change the name from the T-72BM, which was, to the T-72BU. But this was rejected because they saw it as being grouped in with the T-72. They wanted it to have a brand new designation by itself. Therefore, the 188 was given the name T-90. And that is where we get the T90 from. So when people talk about the T72BU or the T72BM, you're pretty much talking about the T90 itself. This is why it gets a little bit confusing. And then if you want the true, 90s MBT from the Soviets, what you end up with is the T90A, which is the much more pushed on version of the T90. This is much more of an intermediary stage towards the T90A, which I see as the Soviet top tier MBT of the 90s. So if you want to really knock this down, you've got a T72, which is highly modified, added Contact 5 to it, added the fire control system of the T80, kept the auto-loading system of the T72, added different armor packages on top of it, and given it better engine, better ammo, so it can push forward and do some wonderful things. That's pretty much, the T90 in a nutshell. It's kind of surprising it hasn't come to game yet, because of the fact that it isn't too much. Well, it is a decent upgrade, but it's not a huge upgrade of what we already have. It would have been a surprise if we saw something like the T90A. The armor on the front is around about 650 to 750 against kinetic energy, and that is obviously guessed because we don't know the actual values, and therefore when it comes to the values on it, I'm not really going to go through it because it just kind of annoys me that now we have to talk about maybe values. Obviously all of this is classified. The T90, at least in some form, is still used today in large amounts, therefore we're not going to know enough about the armor values. And yes, a lot of people will claim that they know those armor values. Those people are wrong. The next vehicle to have a look at is the T-17 armored car. This is from Cade, and it's from an actual suggestion of the Armored Cars research line project, where he's basically put all of the armored cars that we could see in game together. It's an incredible piece of work, and he's also broke them down into smaller areas, such as for the T-17. So the T-17 is another one of these American-made armored car designs, which was used by the British and used a lot by the British in the Second World War. Very similar to what some of the designs as we already have in the game, and there were many different ones. So in 1941, the U.S. Army Ordnance issued specifications for a medium armored car alongside the specification for a heavy armored car. So the Ford Motor Company built the six-wheeled one, which we know as the Deerhound, and then Chevrolet built a four-wheeled one, which eventually became the T-17E1. Now, it's a little bit confusing when it comes to designations because certain vehicles have the same name, but it is unfortunately how it is. After researching a lot about the Kitty Hawk or the P-40 series of aircraft, with the Tomahawk and the P-40N and stuff, the designations are all over the place, depending on depending on who you're looking for. But basically, the Americans made a medium armored car and a heavy armored car design. The British at the time needed a medium and a heavy armored car to be used in North Africa. Therefore, they asked the Americans if they could buy these sets of T-17s. The Americans said yes, therefore they were adopted into service. If the US had actually adopted this armored car, it wouldn't be known as the T-17 or what it's colloquially known as the Staghound. Instead, what it would be known as would be the M6, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, you may know it as the Staghound. Others may know it as the T-17. It doesn't really matter. The main thing is it's a little armored car which had two Hercules JXD engines in it. It's four-wheeled mainly, as you can see here, with the 6v6 not really going anywhere. I mean, we do have the Boarhound in game, which you know about, which is a little bit bigger than it, but the T-17 6v6 wheel prototype, or 6x6, sorry, is this. It's the Deerhound. So hopefully we get this at some point. I don't see why we wouldn't. It's quite a large mumbo jumbo, but at the end of the day, if we get the Staghound, the Boarhound, we might as well get the Deerhound too. The main ones we're talking about here, the T-17E1s, the 4x4s, which, of course, were the Staghounds. So you can see these are the different designs of the Staghound, and what is lovely about Cade is that he's actually done a little section on each. So we've got the Deerhound, already showed you it here, the big mumbo jumbo. The E1 was known as the Staghound Mark I, and this mounted a 37mm M6, so similar to the Stuarts in game, had a coaxial 30 caliber. Then we have the 2-inch smoke mortar in the rotating turret, and then also it had a 30 cal anti-aircraft defense on the top. The 37mm was gyroscopically stabilized, and something to think about, this little machine here had a crew of 5 people, which is just, it is insane when you think about it. It's a crew of 5 people in this little car, which is incredibly impressive. Very snug in a bug, very tight as a bug, snug in a rug, I think is how you say it. So the Staghound Mark II is a field conversion, which added a 3-inch howitzer Mark I to it for close mounted support in place of the 37. That sounds incredibly fun. Hopefully that goes really well. Then the Staghound Mark III, depending on what you want to look at, it's 2 separate vehicles. So in 1945 and I think late 1944, there was ideas to push forward the Staghound system. Basically, when you have a bunch of turrets lying around, it's a lot easier just to manufacture a turret instead of a whole tank. So what they did is they built the 57mm turret from the Crusader tank and the 75mm turret from the Crusader tank and plonked them on top of Staghounds. And this basically meant that they could be used for heavy troops of armored car regiments. They could be used as a pseudo tank destroyer idea, but mainly they would be used just for infantry support once again. So yeah, you pretty much have a Staghound, but with what would be known as a Crusader turret. Then you have a T-17E3. This was a prototype design from the Americans where they mounted a 75mm howitzer from the M8. So we have the M8 in game. It's now in the Chinese and the American tech tree. Basically take the turret from that and add it to the Staghound chassis. That is what you get here. Just a prototype, never entered production. Now we have the T-17E1 Tulip 4. So if you ever see a Tulip mounted, oh sorry, if you ever see Tulip in a name for a British vehicle when it comes to the ground, it normally means that it can fire rockets. It basically has well, I suppose you'd call it an upgrade package, but basically what was added to it would be rocket launcher rails, normally just Mark 1s, and on those rocket launcher rails you would mount RP3 rockets. The idea for this would be to give them a little bit more oomph to be able to either take out positions or maybe cause some confusion, I suppose, with the enemy, or maybe some extra just fire from these vehicles. So these were just mounted straight on the sides of the turret. This was done by the Royal Canadian. This was done by the Canadians, and also the Royal Canadian Air Force was very much involved in this with a HQ company, Staghound. And the main problem they found with them is if you fired at a close distance, the rockets themselves would not go off. If you fired at a far distance, the accuracy and general range of them was not very good either. So the RP3s in general were just not seen as very combat effective when it came to the ground. Either not accurate enough at long ranges, or they were not reliable enough for short ranges, such as they just wouldn't go off. So that would be the T-17E1 Tulip 4. And then you've got the Tulip 8. So the Tulip 8, instead of just adding 4 RP3 rockets to a T-17, why not add 8 specified, rockets, 3-inch and 5-inch rockets. And these were allocated to the 1st Canadian Army for the land mattress artillery rockets, which, if you know what the land mattress is, that must have been an incredibly scary thing to hear. So this placed 4 rockets in box launchers on either side of the turret. The main problem with these is they actually did damage to the vehicle that they were used on. So you can see here the rockets firing forward since they are connected to the turret, so therefore as the turret turned, the rockets would turn. The main problem you have, and you can also see it's attached to the gun, so the elevation is as far as the gun goes. So you can see the explosion, or the propulsion going behind the rockets is hitting the back of the Staghound. Well, you can see the damage that it did here. You've actually got a crumpled mudguard from the rocket itself. So it was just seen as, is it really worth firing these rockets when it seems to do damage to your own vehicle? Generally not a great idea. But overall, I would love to see these Staghounds in game. 97 horsepower over 2 separate engine, 4-wheeled monsters with either a 37, the short-barreled 75 howitzer, the long-barreled 75 Crusader gun, or the 57. There's so many you could add to the game. You could add all of these, rank 1, rank 2, and it would be a hell of a lot of fun for the British. The next vehicle we're looking at is from Tasty, 95215, and it's talking about the Shisai, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, the 15cm Taranso rocket launcher. So this was a Toyota KC truck which had a 20-barreled rocket launcher on the back, with the rocket launcher firing 150mm rockets. These rockets weighed 30 kilos each, and when it came to explosive mass, they had an explosive mass of around 5 kilos. If you compare them to the Nobelwerfer rockets, they are definitely not as fast. They're actually just less than half the velocity. Just more than half the velocity. So the 150mm rockets were 190 meters per second of muzzle velocity, and they could go to about 4.2 kilometers. The German ones could go at 342 meters per second and at a range of 6.9 kilometers. And of course, the rockets themselves were spin stabilized, and pretty much what you just have here is a truck, the Toyota Model KC, mounted with a rocket system. That's it. There's no bells and whistles. There's no craziness here. That's just it. The bog standard way of doing things. Kind of like how when you look at the Soviet trucks, they just have a machine gun attached to the back of them. Just take that machine gun off and add some rockets, and that's basically what you have here. So it would be a nice little fun event vehicle, as long as the rockets weren't too powerful, because it would just be annoying as hell to fight. But overall, yeah, it's one of those kind of throwaway vehicles that would be fun for a very specific event. The next vehicle we're having a look at is from Otto Melara, so therefore Italy. This is a big 155 Chungus. This is the Palmeri 155mm SPH. and in this article is from PF. So the Palmeri self-propelled howitzer, the idea of it was that it was basically just the turret. At least that's what was going to be exported. So Otto Melara made this 155mm gun along with this aluminium turret, and the idea would be to sell the turret and the gun as its own piece, and then other nations such as Libya, Nigeria, and others such as Argentina would fit them on top of pre-existing chassis. So in the case of Argentina, they fitted them to a locally built TAM light tank chassis. So if you really wanted to stretch it, you could add this vehicle to the German tech tree if you wanted to. But the one we're going to be focusing on today is kind of the prototype version, which shows off the capabilities of the 155 on top of a stable gun platform. So the chassis that was used to try and test, the 155mm and the turret, which is what they were trying to sell, was the OF40. But it wasn't just an OF40, it was an OF40 which had a better engine in it. It had the K500 turbocharged diesel engine, had 750 horsepower behind it, and also had an auxiliary power unit. So this is something that we haven't seen in game yet, but will become more prominent with the mechanics that were added in updates 1.91. Now in game you can turn off your engine, and what that will do is it will eventually bleed the electricity in your vehicle, meaning that you're going to have a slow turret, or you're going to lose some functionality of your vehicle. The problem is a lot of systems nowadays have backup systems or alternate systems which they can run on, and this machine is one of them. So even if you turn off your engine, you would still be able to operate at maximum capacity for a decent amount of time. This 155mm can fire a burst of 3 rounds in 20 seconds. Maximum rate of fire is around 6 rounds per minute, and sustained fire is one round every 3 minutes. So you can see that the maximum that you can get is pretty decent. But if you actually fire over a long period of time, it's only going to be 1 round every 3 minutes. On top of this, it does have an auto-loaded system. It has a 23mm ready rack in the back, 30mm of rounds in total, with the magazine at the back holding 23 as we talked about. The other 7 is just stored in the hull around this area. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting machine. We have, of course, the Type 75 that was just added to the game, so why not add in all of these vehicles from all of the other nations, which are pretty similar. This fires the standard NATO ammunition, just like a lot of the other ones do. And what is kind of interesting about this vehicle is it was never really designed for Italian use, because the Italians were already using the Panzer, the PZH 2000, which, if you don't know what this thing is, it is, of course, the German version of the 1.5 of the artillery idea for at least NATO standards. So yeah, it's just kind of interesting that this, even though Italy had its own howitzer already, they decided to make another one, or at least Otto Melara did, in space of, when it comes to exports. Now, it does have access to a bunch of different rounds. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to talk about them in a competent way, because at least for me, when it comes to War Thunder, they're never going to work as they do in real life, because if they did, you would have a hell of a problem on your hands with the accuracy of artillery pieces like this. Anyway, the next vehicle, or the last vehicle, is from Private Woke, and this is talking about the AMX-30C2. Now, this was the vehicle that everybody thought the AMX-30 Super was. They were wrong. The AMX-30C2 was a modernization package for the AMX-30. The idea is you would add a better engine in it, you would add a stabilizer, basically, or a gyroscopic stabilized gun, you would add better suspension, and also a better round to it. So this was to try and bring the AMX-30 into more modern day in the 1990s, to keep it so the people who had it exported to would be happy, they would be able to buy this upgrade, and also to try and upgrade native-born AMX-30s. This didn't really work out, and a lot of people went with other ideas, mainly because the AMX-30 by this point in its time had definitely run its course. But at the same time, it would be a main tech tree vehicle, which would rival the Super for the AMX series of vehicle. You know, a better APF SDS round, the 850 horsepower engine, which would be lovely, but the main thing being the stabilizer, which none of the other AMX 30s in the tech tree have. So those are the main differences between, you know, the B and the C that we have in the tree right now. And hopefully this eventually gets added to try and crown off the AMX 30s in the tech tree, because to be honest, you know, the AMX 30s are really fun to play. The problem is you know, the stabilizer really hinders them. The fact that everything else is running around gallivanting with a stabilizer and you're kind of stuck, you know, unfortunately not having one. You do have the 20mm though, which is a hell of a lot of fun, and also the heat shell, which is fun. But yeah, with this you'd be slinging APF SDS all day long. So that is the last vehicle which was passed in for consideration. A lot of modern stuff today, but a lovely article on the Staghound and also the T31. A lot of ideas for event vehicles, in my opinion, like this. This could easily be an event vehicle. Some of the Staghounds could be an event vehicle, but not the major ones, but some of them. So the Deerhound as well, which is in there. And of course, this would be a lovely main tech tree vehicle to give the French a standard, not copy, but something which would be equivalent to the AMX 30 Super. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, John Ryman, Joseph Anders, Martinez, Mopar 1969, Moxie, Super Cacti, Uyans Terry, and Eel of Goats, and of course Seductive Trash Can for supporting the channel.